The foundation. Alina Rodriguez pressed her fingers against her temples, staring at the mountain of financial documents spread across their mahogany dining table. The numbers told a story she'd lived through, but somehow never fully acknowledged. Until now. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of her career taking a back seat to Marcus's ambitions. And 7 years of being the invisible architect behind his gleaming real estate empire. "You're still working?" Marcus's voice carried that particular tone of mild annoyance she'd grown accustomed to. He stood in the doorway, adjusting his Italian silk tie, the one she'd bought him for his birthday last year, with money from her dwindling savings account. "Just reviewing the quarterly projections for Castellano Properties," she replied, not looking up. The irony wasn't lost on her that his company bore his surname, while her maiden name had been quietly erased from everything that mattered. Marcus moved behind her chair, his cologne expensive and overpowering. "You know, you don't need to handle all this anymore. I've got people for that now. People." As if Alina hadn't been the person who'd kept his books balanced during the lean years, who'd refinanced her own condo to provide startup capital, who'd worked 60-hour weeks at the accounting firm to pay their bills while he chased his dreams. "Of course," she said simply, gathering the papers into neat stacks. "I just want to make sure everything's in order." Marcus was already distracted, scrolling through his phone with the intensity of a man whose world revolved around notifications and deal-making. Alina watched his reflection in the window, noting how his jaw tightened when he read certain messages, how his thumb would hover over the screen before typing responses with unusual care. "I'll be late tomorrow night," he said without looking up. "Big client dinner. The Riverside development deal, remember?" Alina remembered many things Marcus assumed she'd forgotten. Remembered when he used to tell her about every client, every deal, every small victory. Now his professional life had become a series of vague references and closed doors. Of course, she repeated, the phrase becoming her default response to his increasingly frequent absences after Marcus disappeared. Upstairs, Alina remained at the table, surrounded by the evidence of their shared success that felt anything but shared. She pulled out her laptop and opened a new spreadsheet, not for Castellano Properties this time, but for herself. At the top, she typed a simple header, Asset Analysis E. Rodriguez. The numbers that emerged painted a picture that would have shocked anyone who knew them as the golden couple of Marcus's social circle. Elena's fingerprints were on every major investment, every property acquisition, every loan guarantee. Her name appeared on documents going back to their second year of marriage, when she'd trusted him enough to make herself financially liable for his dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Carmen. "Still coming to dinner Sunday? Haven't seen you in weeks." Alina stared at the message, realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd made plans that didn't revolve around Marcus's schedule or his business obligations. When had she become so small in her own life? Upstairs, she could hear Marcus on a phone call, his voice carrying that animated enthusiasm he reserved for important conversations. She caught fragments through the floorboards, something about perfect timing, and she has no idea. Alina saved her spreadsheet and closed the laptop. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start paying attention to the details Marcus thought she was too trusting to notice. After all, 7 years of managing, his books had taught her that the devil was always in the details. The investigation. Alina's transformation began with the smallest of changes, a shift from willful blindness to calculated observation. She started carrying her phone everywhere, no longer leaving it charging in the kitchen while she worked in other rooms. She began noting Marcus's patterns with the same meticulous attention she'd once applied to his business accounts. Tuesday evenings became strategy sessions that ran until midnight. Thursday lunches stretched into 3-hour affairs with potential investors. And always, always, there was the phone face down on every surface, password protected, and guarded like state secrets. The breakthrough came on a rainy Wednesday morning. Marcus had rushed out for an emergency site visit, forgetting his iPad on the kitchen counter. Alina stared at it for a full minute, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The device was logged into his email, notifications popping up like breadcrumbs leading to the truth she'd been avoiding. Her hands trembled as she opened his messages. Most were routine business correspondence, but buried among the construction updates and client communications was a thread that made her stomach lurch. Messages to and from someone named Stella Martinez, filled with inside jokes, heart emojis, and references to shared lunches that didn't appear on his business calendar. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Read the most recent message. I found the perfect place for what we discussed." Lena screenshotted everything, her years of financial training kicking in as she methodically documented each piece of evidence. She created a secure folder on her personal cloud drive, organizing the information with the same precision she'd once applied to Marcus's tax returns by Thursday. She had hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Rivera, who came highly recommended by Elena's divorce lawyer friend, Patricia. Elena had called Patricia under the guise of needing a referral for a friend's situation. But Patricia's knowing tone suggested she understood exactly whose situation needed investigating. "Men like your husband's successful, charming, narcissistic. They follow predictable patterns," Detective Rivera explained during their discreet coffee shop meeting. "They get sloppy because they assume their wives are too dependent or too trusting to question them." Elena provided Rivera with Marcus's schedule, his favorite restaurants, and his business associates. Within a week, the detective had compiled a dossier that read like a manual on infidelity. Marcus and Stella met twice weekly at upscale locations around the city. She was 26, a marketing coordinator at a boutique firm that handled some of Castellano Properties' advertising. She drove a red Honda Civic and lived in a trendy downtown apartment that, according to Rivera's research, had recently been upgraded with furniture that matched Marcus's expensive tastes. The photographs were harder to look at than Elena had anticipated. Marcus's hand on Stella's lower back as they entered restaurants, his arm around her shoulders as they walked through the park where he'd once proposed to Elena, his face animated and joyful in ways Elena hadn't seen directed at her in months. But it was the financial records that truly revealed the scope of his deception. Elena discovered a credit card she'd never seen, funded by their joint business account, used exclusively for his dates with Stella. Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, to resorts Elena had never visited. Jewelry purchases from stores that had never delivered anything to their home. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus's own carelessness. Elena found receipts in his suit pockets not just for dinners and gifts, but for consultations with jewelers, venue deposits, and even a photographer specializing in intimate proposal sessions. Elena spread the evidence across her dining room table, same table where she'd built his empire one careful calculation at a time. This time, however, she was calculating something entirely different. She was tallying the cost of 7 years of trust, measuring the value of her sacrifices against his betrayals, planning a response that would be as methodical and devastating as Marcus believed himself to be charming and untouchable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working. Late again tonight?" "Don't wait up," Elena typed back. "Of course. Take care of yourself." But as she hit send, she was already opening her laptop to continue documenting the systematic dismantling of their marriage. One receipt and one lie at a time. The anniversary deception, March 15th, had always been their day. 7 years ago, Marcus had proposed to Elena on a sunset beach in Monterey, promising her a lifetime of adventures and shared dreams. This year, their anniversary fell on a Friday, and Elena had spent weeks planning what she believed would be their celebration reservations at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where they'd had their first date. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Marcus said that morning, his voice heavy with manufactured regret as he adjusted his tie in their bedroom mirror. The Johnson development hit a snag. "I have to fly to Sacramento for an emergency meeting with the investors. If I don't handle this personally, we could lose the entire project." Elena nodded from their bed, watching him pack his overnight bag with the same clothes he'd worn to previous business trips that Detective Rivera had proven were romantic getaways. "I understand business comes first." "You're incredible for being so supportive," Marcus said, leaning down to kiss her forehead with lips that had been kissing another woman for months. "I'll make it up to you next weekend, I promise." After he left, Elena called Chez Laurent and canceled their reservation. Then she opened the burner phone Detective Rivera had given her and typed a simple message. "He's moving. Are you in position?" The response came immediately, ready to document everything. Elena spent the morning preparing for an entirely different kind of anniversary celebration. She dressed carefully in a black wrap dress and pearls professional. Elegant, invisible in the background of an upscale restaurant. She drove across town to Celestial, the rooftop restaurant Rivera had identified as Marcus's chosen venue for his proposal to Stella. She arrived early and requested a corner table. With a view of the main dining room, the hostess, a young woman with practiced smile, led her to a spot that provided perfect sightlines to the restaurant's centerpiece, a glass-enclosed private dining area surrounded by fairy lights and overlooking the city's skyline. At 7:30, Marcus arrived wearing the navy suit Alina had helped him select for their own engagement photos. He was nervous in a way she hadn't seen since their early dating days, checking his phone constantly and adjusting his appearance in every reflective surface. Stella appeared 10 minutes later, radiant in a flowing, emerald dress that Alina recognized. From Marcus's recent credit card statements, Alina ordered wine and pretended to read emails on her phone while photographing everything. Marcus had requested the restaurant's proposal package, champagne service, a violinist, and a photographer, who Alina realized had been paid for with money from their joint account. The moment came just as Elena's entree arrived. Marcus dropped to one knee in the fairy-lit dining room, producing a ring box that contained a diamond. Elena's forensic accounting had traced back to Tiffany & Co. The purchase had been made 3 weeks ago, the same day Marcus had told her he was visiting construction sites. Stella's reaction was everything Marcus had hoped. 4 tears, excitement, and a yes that echoed across the restaurant as other diners applauded. Alina watched Stella examine the ring, the same style Alina had once admired in a magazine. Marcus had apparently kept after all these years. Alina paid her bill quietly and left before the champagne service began. She drove home through the city streets where she and Marcus had once planned their future. Past the coffee shop where they'd spent Sunday mornings reading the paper together. Past the park where they'd walked their dog before he died, and Marcus had been too busy to help her grieved at home. She found Marcus's study exactly as he'd left it, his desk scattered with business documents that were meant to provide his alibi. Alina cleared everything away and began arranging her own papers in neat stacks. Divorce documents prepared by Patricia's colleague, financial records proving Elena's ownership stake in everything Marcus considered his empire, bank statements showing 7 years of Elena's contributions to their joint ventures, asset valuations for properties purchased with Elena's inheritance from her grandmother. In the center of the desk, she placed a single photograph from Detective Rivera's surveillance Marcus on one knee, proposing to Stella with Elena's money. On Elena's anniversary, while Elena's trust funded his betrayal. Beneath the photograph, she left a handwritten note in her careful accountant's script. "Congratulations on your engagement. I've prepared an itemized bill for the celebration. Payment is due immediately." Alina packed a single suitcase and checked into a hotel downtown. She ordered room service, opened a bottle of wine, and waited for morning. By dawn, Marcus would discover that his perfectly planned double life had collided with Elena's perfectly planned response. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera. "Package delivered to Stella Martinez as requested. She now has copies of your wedding photos and marriage certificate." Alina smiled for the first time in months and poured herself another glass of wine. Happy anniversary to her. The reckoning Marcus's key turned in the front door at 6:15 Saturday morning, and Alina could hear his footsteps from her hotel room across town through the security app she'd installed months ago. She imagined him dropping his overnight bag in the foyer, loosening his tie, perhaps even humming from the euphoria of his successful deception. The silence that followed told her he'd reached his study. Her phone rang. 7 minutes later. "Alina, what the hell is this?" Marcus's voice carried none of his usual charm, replaced instead by a panic she'd never heard before. "Good morning, Marcus. How was Sacramento?" Elena's voice remained steady as she sipped her hotel coffee, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. Cut the act. "I found your little ... display. This is insane, Alina. We can talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" Lena interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Like how you rationally spent our anniversary proposing to another woman?" You rationally used our joint account to buy her engagement ring? The silence stretched long enough that Alina wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, Marcus's voice returned, smaller now. How did you know? I'm an accountant, Marcus. Don't lie, even when the people behind them do. Alina opened her laptop, pulling up the spreadsheets that had consumed her evenings for weeks. Would you like me to walk you through the itemized breakdown? 7 years of financial contributions, totaling $847,000 in direct investment in Castellano. Properties. My inheritance funding the Riverside project down payment, my credit score securing the construction loans when yours wasn't sufficient. Alina, please, let me explain, I'm not finished. Her voice cut through his pleading with surgical precision. You'll notice the divorce papers include a complete audit of our shared assets. Turns out, when someone contributes 73% of the capital for a business venture, they're entitled to significantly more than their partner assumed. Marcus's breathing became audible over the phone. You can't do this, the company. The properties I built all of this. With my money, Marcus. My credit. My connections at the bank. My weekend hours spent managing your books while you networked at golf courses. Alina stood and walked to her hotel window, looking down at the city where Marcus thought he ruled like a king. I particularly enjoyed discovering that the Celestial restaurant charges a 20% gratuity on proposal packages. It's very thorough of you to document that expense. How long have you known? Long enough to prepare properly. You always told me I was too trusting, too naive for business. Turns out, I'm an excellent student when properly motivated. Alina could hear papers rustling as Marcus presumably examined the legal documents more carefully. She gave him time to absorb the scope of his situation. The asset freezes. The business partnership dissolution. Forensic accounting that would be conducted on every transaction he'd hidden from her. Stella, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, received a comprehensive package this morning. Wedding photos, marriage certificate, bank records showing how you funded your relationship with our money. Detective Rivera was very thorough in her documentation. Elena paused, letting that sink in. She sends her congratulations on your engagement, by the way. She's particularly impressed by your creativity in scheduling romantic getaways during our anniversary weeks for the past 2 years. Marcus's voice cracked. Alina, I never meant for it to happen this way. Stella doesn't know about you. She's innocent in all this. Innocent? Alina laughed, a sound without warmth. She accepted a proposal from a man who lied about being married. She's been accessory to adultery for 8 months. But you're right about one thing she didn't know. She was helping you spend another woman's money on their affair. What do you want? Nothing from you, Marcus. I want what's already mine. Alina closed her laptop and gathered her belongings. Check your email. My attorney has sent a complete settlement proposal. Oh, you have 48 hours to respond before we file in court and make this public record. Alina, please. She hung up and blocked his number. By noon. Alina's phone was buzzing with calls from Marcus's business associates, his lawyer, and eventually from Stella herself. Alina ignored them all, except for one Detective Rivera. Confirming that Marcus had been seen at Stella's apartment building, apparently engaged in what witnesses described as a very animated discussion in the parking lot, Alina checked out of her hotel and drove to her sister Carmen's house, where she would stay until her new apartment was ready. As she pulled into the driveway, her phone chimed with an email from Marcus's attorney, accepting her settlement terms in full. The reckoning was complete. The new beginning 6 months later, Alina stood in her new downtown loft. Sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows onto hardwood floors she'd chosen herself. The space was entirely hers. No compromises, no shared decisions, no invisible sacrifices. Her consulting firm, Rodriguez Financial Solutions, had quickly gained a reputation for helping women navigate complex asset divisions during divorce proceedings. The settlement had been more generous than even Alina had anticipated. Marcus's desperation to avoid public scrutiny had worked in her favor, and Castellano Properties was now primarily hers to restructure or sell as she chose. She'd kept the profitable ventures and let Marcus retain the riskier developments, along with their associated debts. Alina Rodriguez. A warm voice interrupted her thoughts as she browsed the biography section of Cornerstone Books. Her new Saturday morning ritual. I've been hoping to properly introduce myself. James Miccioli owned this place, Lena looked up to find. A man about her age, with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers, wearing a worn cardigan that somehow managed to look deliberately chosen rather than carelessly grabbed. I've noticed you here most weekends, James continued, slightly embarrassed. You always seem to know exactly what you're looking for. These days I do, Alina replied, closing the book she'd been examining. Financial independence has given me clarity about many things. James laughed, a genuine sound that reminded Alina what authentic emotion looked like. A fellow advocate for the transformative power of self-determination. Can I interest you in coffee? There's a place next door that doesn't overcharge for the privilege of reading while caffeinated. As they walked to the cafe, James asked about her work, listening with genuine interest as she explained her consulting practice. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer unsolicited advice, didn't assume he knew better despite her expertise. And you? Lena asked as they settled at a small table overlooking the street. Always wanted to own a bookstore. Actually, I was a corporate lawyer until 3 years ago, James admitted. Specialized in business acquisitions until I realized I was helping people buy and sell things that mattered more than money. The bookstore was my rebellion against a life that looked successful but felt hollow. Alina studied his face, noting the absence of calculation she'd grown accustomed to recognizing. Do you miss it? The prestige? The income? Never. Turns out, building something that reflects your actual values is infinitely more satisfying than building someone else's empire. James paused, then added quietly, I imagine you understand something about that transition. For the first time in years, Alina found herself genuinely curious about another person's story rather than defensive about her own. They talked until the cafe began preparing for the lunch rush, about books and business ethics, about the courage required to start over, about the unexpected freedom that came from choosing authenticity over security. Would you like to have dinner sometime? James asked, as they prepared to leave. Somewhere we can continue this conversation without the pressure of closing time. Alina considered the question, not from the perspective of whether she was ready to date again, but from the simpler standpoint of whether she wanted to spend more time with this particular person. The answer surprised her with its clarity. I'd like that, she said, and meant it, as Alina walked home through streets that now felt like hers to navigate. She thought about the difference between building a life with someone and building a life that happened to include someone. For the first time since her marriage ended, she felt genuinely curious about what that distinction might mean in practice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. How was your morning? Lena typed back, unexpectedly, promising. And for once she wasn't calculating the cost.